T minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Welcome to the Vox Intellectus podcast, or the VIP podcast. I'm Harish, and this is.
Chris.
We are both graduate students at the Vision and Image Processing Lab at the University of Waterloo, and hence the name. Our purpose is to make research more accessible to the public, and in doing so, have excellent conversations with people well versed in their craft. With this podcast, our hope is to garner widespread interest in science, research, and academia in general. We hope you all enjoy this pilot episode of our podcast.
So please let us welcome our first ever guest. Yuhao Chen is a research assistant professor at the Vision and Image Processing Lab. That's the Systems Design Engineering Department here at the University of Waterloo. When one Googles up Yuhao Chen on Google Scholar, what comes up is a profile of a researcher akin to a true Renaissance man. From plant stem segmentation through AI for unmanned aerial vehicles for agricultural applications to robotic grasping and food nutritional value benchmark datasets. Yuhao not only conducts his own research, but also is a key player in the Visual Information Processing Lab, where he manages multiple projects related to various domains of computer vision and is the backbone of in-lab logistics and the person you run to when things go wrong and you don't know what to do. Yuhao, it's a huge pleasure to have you on our podcast, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me. It's my pleasure to come to this podcast and be the first guest.
Yeah, hoping to have a really enriching conversation with
Yep.
Yuhao. All right, so let's get started. Let me ask a very basic question, since this entire podcast is currently themed towards research. According to you, what do you think the word research means? Because to a lot of different folks, research means different things. So, for example, what research means to me is basically croaking a lot of papers, academic papers, implementing them, seeing if I can find some novelty or get inspired by an idea, and then present it to the scientific community. Likewise, what does research mean to you?
That's a good question. So I think the definition of research keep evolving as I progress. So recently, I would think research as a more of solving the problem and then finding whatever the solution that works and then apply it to your problem. And then, especially given how open source the technologies are, um, the the fundamental way of doing research, I think, has been changed in the field. So, with the speeds, for example, for all the video generation repositories or research work that recently pop out, they all have a. It's always like every 2 weeks there's a new work coming out, and then they have open source. So compared to a couple of years ago, where you have to use OpenCV and then compile it from scratch using C++ and re-implement a lot of algorithm based on the paper description. Current computer vision research, it's you have a lot of freedom to use all the open source tools that you can apply and then apply it to your problem. It makes you makes the problem solving process much faster, and then that has significantly redefined my way of doing research in the field. Is that uh, before I would spend a lot of time thinking about um, how to come up with much better method to solve the problem. But now it's more about understanding the problem and then finding the best tool to use to solve the problem. And then even though there's the availability of the tool allows you to try a bunch new algorithms and new ideas in the field, there's still a lot of challenges associated with those tools, and then solving them is also a very interesting problem. I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, that's a nice take. Um, so, what are the major and broader interests that you that span across your research? What are you interested in? Because I know for a fact that you work on a bunch of different stuff, especially in deep learning, but it'll be nice to hear what really interests you in that.
So I think for me, it's I I liked research having the freedom in research. I don't have a particular interest, but I think to conclude what my research is about is to transform whatever in the physical world into the digital world. Um, that is the the one story that I want to tell. How can we apply different techniques to transform that? So I've done research on nutrition analysis, which is taking food and then make it into 2D or 3D. And recently, we have been investigating into how to capture the physics of the food when it's interact with different utensils, and then capture that and put into 3D rather than like doing it through simulation engine. How can we do it with just the visual data and then let the machine learning algorithm understand that? So that is just one aspect. I also work uh, on human avatar generation digitization that I don't have funding for it, but it interests me. And then I found several graduate students who is also interested in the topic, and then we form a club. And then also some of them are taking my course, and then they are doing a project on that. So um, there is no clear definition on what I what kind of research I do. I think that's the part that interests me as a working in academia, is that I have the total freedom to do whatever I like to do.
So the overarching theme of your research is basically computer vision, right?
Yeah.
So given the fact that you mentioned the field is moving at such a fast pace, how do you stay up to date with the papers? How do you stay up to date with the newest research, and how do you decide where to focus your attention? Is that basically a matter of interest, something that excites you, or is it more of a cold, calculated look at what's going to give me the most bang for the buck for my time?
So I do this through structured and unstructured two approach. So through structured, it's I host four reading group for vision, and then each one has a specific topic, like video vision, 2D vision, 3D vision, and then also generative AI. And then for that, I am able to look into a lot of new research in each directions. And then the rest of the time, I often just spend my time on during my commute, and then reading some papers that interest me, and then follow some people on YouTube, and then so some of the research get pushed to my feed, and then if the title interests me, and then I will just read it. Um, yeah, so it's through the structure way. Uh, I often have dedicated time to read papers, and then for unstructured, whenever I find time, I will just read it, and then also follow several um, bloggers or on YouTube and the other feed as well.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned about reading papers when you're probably commuting and stuff like that. One of the most important questions right now for especially people who are entering research or who are interested in research is basically how to read a research paper. And because, especially as you mentioned in AI, there's probably a bunch of papers that come out every single day, and you have hordes of papers in each conference that happen, and some are relevant to specific kinds of people. It totally depends on what you focus on. And a lot of papers are probably not relevant to your specific focus, but still important all the same. My first question would be, how do you choose what's relevant to you based on when you look at probably an open access paper or an archive. And the second thing is, what do you think is the ideal way to read a paper in order to understand the maximum?
So I don't have a very clear definition on how to read a paper. It's
Well, how do
sometimes
you read it?
how do I read it? So mainly I start first glance, and then if the title interests me, and then if there's some cool looking graph or they have a cool website, and show the demo results, right? And then if it interests me, and then I look into the abstract and see what kind of first what kind of problem they are solving, and second what technique they use, and third, basically it's the abstract, what you typically write. Are they having wonderful performance? And then if that the technique interests me, and the technique is something that I'm not aware of, it's a new thing, then I will dive more into the detail of the technique, um, on the mathematic aspect. So for a very good paper, that I will spend multiple pass reading it, and then also play with the code. I think that's quite important for me to understand it fully, because when you first read it, you don't really you understand the high level concept. So for example, let's take the recent Gaussian splatting paper that came out maybe 2 months ago. And then the idea is quite simple, like it's a mixture of Gaussian. And then, but when you actually dive into the details of their code implementation, then you will start to paying attention to, oh, what if I want to modify this learning of this transformation to simulate the Gaussian covariance matrix? How did they do that? Right? It's all about those tiny little details that matters a lot when applying AI. So you won't get to know it or pay much attention to it unless you actually play with it and then make changes to it. So that's when you actually really know the work itself. So I did spend a lot of time playing with this Gaussian splatting, and then adjust different parameters, and then delete certain lines of code to see how it's different than adding those parts of the code. So it's important for you to actually work with the code to understand the work fully. So, and then even before Gaussian splatting, I also spend a lot of time with typical mask-RN CNN structure. And then um, that's another example where I first read pass or a couple pass, didn't really pay attention to those, how they applied maximum non-max suppression, right? Uh, was there, how did they select the number of clusters? Was there a threshold? Was there, and those are kind of details that in the end, it actually matters a lot when you want to improve your performance. And then you won't get to those details unless you actually work with it. So that is for some work that we really like. Other work, like given all the speed of publications, uh, the 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 speed of the research in the world now, like you don't have the time to do reading for detailed reading and dive into code for every part, every every work that's published this year, right? So mainly it's finding something that it's really interests you, and then it's one thing that I always tell students when they present their work or create their presentation is that good science is a science that you can explain to a 5-year-old people.
Hmm.
So if the work is simple enough and then it have good performance, then it's definitely worth a reading in much detail. So if the work is combination of multiple stages, a lot of twisting, like tweaking on the hyperparameters, maybe you don't have to spend too much time on it. Yeah. So that's my suggestion. I hope that answers your question. I talk quite
No, no,
long.
no.
Yeah.
We're really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
We actually want you to talk more and more.
So that sort of brings me to think you're obviously a very passionate and driven person, and you love what you're doing because even probably your browser bookmarks look like this, that they're full of AI videos and papers to read, right? So you love this, obviously. How did it come about? Um, did you basically wake up one day as a kid, thought to yourself, I want to do AI?
No, no,
Yeah.
no, that's not. Well, I mean, during my career, I also struggled during my career. I did PhD and then did postdoc here, and it was not. I was not like a star student at the beginning. So it's more about finding what I don't want to do in my career, and then finally decide, okay, this is the career I want to follow. So I think I made the decision to go in fully 100% sure going to academia last August after the conference in Mexico. So before that, I wasn't really sure. I was at here doing my postdoc. It was about 80% uh, that 80% that I want to go to in academia. But then after the conference, after the interacting with people and the exchange ideas, I think doing research is what I really want. And then after that um, decision, I, I found myself um, like I don't see myself struggling more because I've made up my mind. And then I start reshaping myself and then modify every single part of my life moving towards that target. And then it just become very simple living. And then I don't feel quite stressed in terms of where to go in the future. And then that is the transition that I took. And then after that, I modify a lot of my lifestyle after that, actually. Like, one part is to get rid of a lot of things that doesn't really help me doing research. Right.
That's a pretty interesting take,
Yeah.
I guess, and we're definitely gonna follow up with a lot of questions about your this phase of your life probably. But before we move along, so when this podcast is being listened by a person who knows that there is such a thing called AI, but they do not know the exact technical aspects of it, for example, the Gaussian splatting that you spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One such term that they are bound to know, definitely, in a more technical sense, is neural networks. And neural networks kind of have a bunch of stuff that's happening around them, and they revolutionize the whole field of machine learning, moving forward into deep learning. What do you think is a neural network? How would you define it? Like, let's say I'm a 5 year old, or Chris is a 5 year old, maybe. And how do you basically explain neural networks to a person who is new to this field?
So, um, that I don't have a physical object. There is a device where it's like the Gaussian distribution device where you have a lot of marbles and then you drop it and then there's a lot of pillars in between and then it will form a Gaussian
Oh, yeah,
distribution, right?
I've seen
That
that in
kind of
Wikipedia.
things is what reminds me of uh, neural network, but instead of pillars, there's small paddles that you can adjust to make those little marbles to control, have a little bit control on the marbles to make sure that they move to in certain direction you want. And then what neural network does is that you are training machine to adjust those little paddles that controls the direction of those marbles, so that all the marbles at the end falls into um, the space that you want it to form. So that's my take on what is a neural network.
Yes. So
Yeah.
basically, like modifying the way the distribution looks by actually
Yeah,
using
you are
the
just
neural
adjusting
network.
it.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
having a bunch of inputs, and then you have the neural network in between, where you basically just adjust the knobs of it, and then you get a desired output. Is that's kind of like the summary of neural
Yeah,
networks,
yeah,
according
yeah.
to you?
So if you see this, oh, the marbles keep popping in the right below, but you want it move to the right, so you adjust the paddle, and then so it bounces to the right. So that kind of operation is what neural network does.
Awesome.
Yep. So you obviously work on a large number of projects here. Which one do you find the most enjoyable? I work with you on a couple of them, but I was always wondering which one Yuhao finds as the sort of most fun of them.
Well, all of them are very interesting. So I enjoy all the projects, but one of them, I think I like the Avatar Club the most because it's purely interest.
Mm.
There's no funding. There's no um, like goal that is defined before. It's all just about just students' interest, and then I see that like some of the students working that project, they just come up with some very good ideas, and then I can see their passion through the project. I think that's the most enjoyable thing that when I manage the project and then work in that direction is to really work with people who are passionate about the problem. And then because that project is more like what is the avatar, what is the problem in the avatar space you want to solve, you want to create, right? Rather than like what is the best algorithm. So it's a different mentality. And then we get one of the undergrads actually is very interested in the problem, and then really want to make it a deployed product. And then he has very good understanding of the problem space. So he can do very good analysis of the problem, and then to showcase all the details that we need to have concern or look into to define the problem. And then that is a wonderful project to work on, because not when people are passionate about certain problems and then make it into a deployable product, it's so different that they don't really care about this is a study, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fruition of great ideas as a tangible thing in our hands is always a really happy and pleasurable feeling, I believe. You mentioned a lot about avatars. So, are those like human 3D scans, or are those about objects too? What are avatars exactly?
It's digital human. It's the you can call it avatar, or you can call it copy of yourself, or you can it can be like VTubers or 2D characters that basically you want to animate it in the metaverse,
Hmm.
and then it will do whatever action you want it to do, and then maybe giving some speech with your voice or with some other voice.
Oh, the recent Lex Friedman podcast. Did you get to see that? So he basically shot his podcast in the metaverse, and then
Yeah.
he got his
Mhm.
entire body scanned, and it was a meeting with Zuckerberg, Mark,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
With
Mark
Mark.
Zuckerberg. Yeah, it was pretty interesting to watch. Probably we'll get there soon.
Hopefully with our
Yeah.
VTuber club. Yeah. I'm only working on the audio though. Okay, so that sort of brings me to another question. So the students who are joining the projects, you work with a lot of them, and definitely there's a distribution of students who are absolutely brilliant and those students who are more successful. and students who are less successful. In your career, what would you define as the most important traits of the students who end up being very successful in academia specifically?
Um, there's no clear answer. I mean, every student, like as long as they are motivated to learn stuff, they are curious. I think curiosity is the most important trait. They are curious about the research, about some problem. It doesn't have to be the problem that you defined for them. Um, then those are the students that have they are great students. So as long as you can work with the student and then understand what they are interested in, then they are great students.
I do have a follow up to this as well. So I personally always had this sort of dread coming about me as a master's student. Is it better for me to focus on one project, one path, and basically intensely work on one certain topic to make it as perfect as possible? Or do you think the approach of having a broad range of topics that you work on and a broad range of projects um, is better for a student's career? And do you think it's better in the sense of increasing the chance for the student to succeed in academia, um, given your experience?
There is no clear answer. It depends on
Again,
every depends on yourself. I don't have so I have a lot of students, and then all of them are different. So some people do 5, 6 projects. Some people just focus on one project. All of them um, were great, and then everything went uh, is going great. So there's no clear definition on what will make you a more successful person, because you students spend on spend time on doing research, and then I think most important thing is to document and then to think about the problem. And it doesn't matter if the problem there's one problem or there's 10 problems. As long as you document what your thinking process and then show it, exchange um, your thinking process with others, I think that's a good research. That's what I look for from the student. It doesn't matter if it's they are doing one project or 10 projects.
Yeah, speaking about the topic of success, so with respect to research, usually a person who has a lot of citations or H index, which are basically just the number of publications and how much useful their publications are, is being taken as a success metric that all over the world, as far as I know. Do you believe that that is the right success metric, or do you have an alternative opinion to that? What are your measures of success for a researcher or in research in general?
That's a good question. So I also struggle a lot thinking about citations. As you can see from my profile, I don't have a lot of citations. Um,
I
um,
beg to differ.
Yeah, I beg to differ too, but then
so, but I would think it's more um, important to understand what you feel about doing research. What is research? For me, research is all about improving advanced technology for the human society, right? As long as it brings value to human society, then it's good research. But different people do it differently. Well, my take on it is that as long as it creates value when it will go into some sort of product that makes people life better, then that is the research. So how do you define that depends on um, there's no clear definition defines that. For me, it's more about can we make an end-to-end product that leverages all different kind of technique that will make it into a deployable product that some end user will be able to use it. That's the impact I'm seeking. While other people may have other opinions.
Perfect.
Yep. So you mentioned a while ago that subtraction was a very important factor in your life. That you figured out what you want to do in research and in life by essentially removing the stuff or identifying the stuff that you don't want to do in the first place. Could you talk a bit more about that? What did you end up subtracting?
Um, so first is I did 2 internship at uh, a company called Qualcomm during my undergrad and then my PhD, and then I end up finding myself doesn't really like working in industry because it lacks certain lacks freedom for doing research, doing what I want. So then that moves me towards trying out working in academia. So that is one big subtraction that contributes to my career. And then later on, let's take the example of after I decide I want to go into academia, is that I start looking about on my life. What is the problem that I'm not able to be efficient? Then I start removing it. So one big commitment is my food. That I found myself feel very sleepy in the afternoon. So and then the reason for that is I ate too much carbohydrate. So I subtract that out of my life for my lunch. So my lunch is only salad now. It has been going on for a year and a half now. It has been working great. So that
That's
is
an
one
interesting
example.
subtraction. Yeah. Actually, along those lines, now that you mentioned about food, have you ever tried fasting? Do you think fasting benefits you by any chance? Because I think it's kind of like a global syndrome where people, when they have a very heavy meal in during their lunch, or any time that they have a heavy meal, you do feel an effect that of sleepiness post that meal, probably after a couple of uh, uh, minutes or hours. Depends on the person exactly. Uh, so, have you tried fasting or have you tried any other alternatives in terms of dietary patterns? And, like, do you think that helps with your work exactly?
I think as long as I found the technique works for myself, I didn't really go in dive into what other technique exist.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, I just cut down my carbohydrate
Mm-hmm.
intake as that works for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Coming back to your subtraction of the industry work and Qualcomm. So Qualcomm was an internship after your undergrad.
So I did one undergrad internship with Qualcomm and then did one during my PhD.
During your PhD. Okay. And what was the transition between the PhD and postdoc like? Is there any was there any challenges in that period in the sense of thinking of like does it pay off for me to get into academia? Does it pay off for me to do research and is it the right decision?
Um, I mean, I think the transition for me was not super clear. I feel like initially going into postdoc was treated as like a continuation of my PhD and then doing work. And one part of it was no no one actually tells me what postdoc should look like, right? I do the same thing over and over again, and then and then it goes into pandemic, so I lost that
Yeah.
interaction with all other people, all other researchers and students, and then I think I I figured during the pandemic, I figured what I don't want is the lack of the communication with the student and researchers. So as soon as I came back to lab, I start building Discord community and then start hosting all the social events. So that is another subtraction. I want to subtract the no communication out of my life. Then I start building it.
Yeah, to any potential future students that are listening to us, we have epic game nights here. So please come join us.
Yeah. And karaoke.
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, indeed.
We sing.
Yeah, actually, I
Not-
organize it. Now I forgot
Yeah.
about
We
it.
Chris
usually
is
shout,
fantastic
but-
singer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. Despite the fact that you mentioned pandemic was pretty heavy on you, and the lack of social interactions was something that was missing. You did manage to stay productive during that time. You managed to co-author at least 5 papers between 2020 and 2021. My question there would be, how do you stay productive in the face of events such as these, where the world around you falls apart?
Well, compared to my current working load, I wouldn't say that's productive at all.
I see.
Yeah, so I think one part that was like continuing my PhD, the behavior, the lifestyle of my PhD during pandemic, and I still find it quite struggle. It was just about fulfilling the task, and then wasn't the lack of interaction with the students, with other researchers, it didn't give me more inspiration on new ideas, more technology to work on. So was able to publish something, but it's not great, I would say. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't say it's not great exactly, because usually when we talk about computer vision and we talk about objects, most of the people usually detect an object using boxes around them called as the bounding boxes. But yet you have a paper titled Locating Objects Without Bounding Boxes, and that has the highest number of citations.
118, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly. That's a pretty good index,
measure,
yeah.
we believe. And I believe this paper came out a couple of years ago, if I'm right. Yeah. So you do stay productive. So we will not accept
Yeah.
your humbleness that your research is not great. So
yeah.
can you talk more about that paper where you basically do not use a fundamental concept that is always followed in computer vision, and how you came out with that idea, how you basically came to the conclusion of the paper, everything about that paper in general?
So I spent in general, because my PhD was studying all the plants, about everything about plants, where the world spent a lot of time general objects like human, like cars, and then other objects as well. I found what challenges in the plants is that they all look similar, but they are different in some way. So one direction in particular interests me is how to model the shape of the plants, so you can find them. And in particular, I spend a lot of time on the on leaves and then of the plants. Is what is a plant, especially for sorghum plant, right? It's basically from the aerial view, it's a combination of different leaves, and then it's more of a grouping definition of individual parts, instead of have a clear definition like human, you have 2 arms, two leg. But for plants, it's the direction of the same object, that multiple instances of it and combine together and make it into a plant from the top view. And then that drove me to study a lot on the fundamental representation of plants. And then for that point, as object paper was about how can we model it with just a single point with a plant. In particular, how can we transform the distance that from the plant the distance understanding into neural network. So, because at that time, neural network was all understand by just changing the value of individual pixels. You slide a window with convolution filters, and then it returns high response when there's a good matching of the window. But how could you embed the distance information into neural networks so that I understand that this response is far away from that plant center and that response is close to the plant center. So that was the main motivation behind that work.
Nice. You mentioned aerial views. I've heard and I've read a couple of papers from you, which basically focus on plant detection and innovations in plant detection from drones. What is the context of such a research? What would be the practical applications in the real world?
So it was for the entire project was about how can we do phenotyping on plants. So phenotyping is basically a combination of genotyping and study with the weathers and then all other things that you can control the traits. So we want to find out the corresponding relationship between how you can manipulate the environment or how you can manipulate the genome of plants to make it express certain traits such as drought resistant or heat resistant. So my study at that time was to apply computer vision and to that problem and then help monitoring or help measuring the certain traits such as number of leaves, and then there was also number of plants in a row, because one of the challenge was that you might drop 10 seed in the ground, and they may not drop evenly or they may drop evenly, but there's no guarantee that all of them will come out.
Yep.
And there's also competition between the plants. So you have to study, you have to find certain traits associated with those as well.
Perfect. So, if I were to ask you, what were the three major areas, just using like three words or, yeah, more than that, the three major areas that you focus on or would like to focus on, what would that be? With respect to your research, of course.
Well, I would say robotics and human avatars and food. Yeah, that's basically the big project I'm doing.
Yeah, prospective students take note.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of technical questions, I guess. Let's get into some non-technical stuff. Dogs or cats?
Cats. I have a cat.
Oh,
Do,
what's
do you have
what's the
one or
name?
two? Because I wasn't ever sure.
I have one, but previously I had two actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the name?
One is so my current cat is called Mocha.
Mocha.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And
because the color pattern on her
okay,
was
I see.
Mocha. Yeah.
And yeah, well, the life of a researcher usually does involve having a lot of commitments, kind of like having a cat or having a family or anything in general. So it's just not research, and most people do not have the privilege of just focusing on research because they have multiple responsibilities in their life. For example, a lot of PhD students here are married, they have kids, they have a family to take care of, and of course, all the other uh, commitments that come along with having a familial life. So, in general, what does the day of Yuhao look like? How does it look like? Uh, you are you a morning or a night person? What's your daily routine? Your diet? Your just your habits? How do you manage pressure, etc., etc.?
Um,
You can even like mention what you do from the morning till night. Yeah, just go along. Let us take
uh,
us along the process.
it's like a spring. Some days I work less, some days I work more, and then I often treat myself. It's not working. I mean, for me, it's not working because I really enjoy what I'm doing.
Hmm.
So I'm more. It's more about having fun. So even during the night, I might do research and run code, and then I treat it as entertainment for myself. And then reading and then watching papers. Um, those are more about like entertainment to myself. So I don't count that as work.
Hmm.
But I think the most intense day would be I wake up at 6, um, and then um, come to lab at 7 and start doing research, and then have lunch around 12 and play some ping pong. And then at 45, play ping pong again. And at 6, going out for dinner or cook my own dinner. And around 8, I go back and then do more work until 12.
Great.
Nice. How do you actually manage time? Do you use certain techniques or anything like that? Do you use a calendar? Do you just keep a running to-do list? Um, because with that intensity, there's definitely commitments that you need to fulfill that are more important, less important, and you have to prioritize and manage your time effectively. What is your secret?
Well, I do have calendars and I just follow my calendar. And then the rest is to-do list. So I know I make sure that I finish tasks based on deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's about it. And then the rest, I would feel like um, I use the rest of my time mostly reading and then relax.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What's your typical research setup? So is it like uh, more than two screens, just one screen, or where do you take notes? Do you have an iPad or do you take notes in a pen and paper, like in a pretty old-fashioned and way? Or what does your general work or slash research setup look like?
Well, I have two screens, and then I just read papers on screen, and then so I spend a lot of time doing thinking, and then write down things. Sketchpad on my notes. It helps me to derive equations and then connect ideas. But I never actually look back my notes. It's more about the process of thinking about the problem. Yeah, that's what I typically do.
I see.
Okay, another important thing is I spend a lot of time watching data. I, for example, the human avatar thing.
Oh, okay.
I watch a lot of like maybe half hour about the data, the dancing videos,
Mm-hmm.
and then I apply some edge detection, depth detection, and then watch again after the process. So I spend a lot of time with data.
Okay. And a follow-up would be, so for example, when you're doing all this stuff, when you're working on your research environment, and when most this happens to most people, I think this happens to everybody in this field exactly. When you get stuck down a rabbit hole where you are stuck with a problem that's important to be solved, but it isn't at the moment, what do you do to get out of that?
Okay, so that comes to the question previously: do you work on one research or do you work on multiple research? So I do multiple research. If one problem is stuck, I pause it and then work on others. So I'm always moving. And then sometimes you get inspiration from your other problem.
Mm.
Then you can sometimes you you let it sit for a week and then
Hmm.
you come back, you will have a fresh mind about the problem. And then you may take a step back, thinking about the problem as a whole. You will find alternative solutions. Yeah.
Yeah. What would be your um, advice to people who happen to start a project or even a thesis or a course, and they ended up failing? What would be your advice? How do you handle failure?
Can you be more specific? Like,
So,
give me an example.
so let's say I'm taking a course and I end up flunking out of the course. This actually happened to me once, or even twice. I had two courses at once, and I basically had to decide to drop the course in the middle of it. So from my personal perspective, this takes a lot of mental energy from me. It takes a toll. And this happens more and more in academia, where you have high risk projects, where you invest a lot of time in things that might not work out. How do you maintain your mental strength and resilience in the face of a potential looming failure?
So, I mean, in terms of research, there's there's no failure. I mean, you just try and then document. So you prove that you did something. That's about research, and there's no clear way of a research that will lead to success. Oftentimes, you are just trying, exploring, and then finding the correct path. Um, and so, in in terms of taking the course, different people have different pace. Some people is um, good at studying. They are more efficient, so they can finish things relatively quickly. And some people don't, so they probably need more time, or they lack certain background knowledge. That's the reason that people fail the course. So I would suggest first really being solid, understand the fundamentals before you understand the prerequisite of the course before you taking that course. Second is to really understand the workload of the course. Some people take longer to study, some people take shorter time, and it doesn't matter. And then course is like um, the content you learn from the course, how good you are cannot really be determined by the exams, right? The exam is just one way of measuring your knowledge on the course material. The the measurement may not be valid or may not be very suitable for you. Some people are just really bad at taking exams within very short amount of time. So that is not a good evaluation. So don't stress too much about it. As long as you understand the basics from the course, I think it's good for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very valuable to hear.
Awesome. So, along these lines, I have another question. So, for example, we both are now masters, and for any person who's finished either their undergrad or their masters, the next step, if they want to progress in academia, is to go for PhDs. And PhD is usually a long time commitment. It's nearly 5 years, and it might be different in different fields. So probably up to 7 years in many cases. Uh, what would what do you think about taking up a PhD? Do you think a PhD is essential for a person in order to pursue research per se? So do you think that's an essential stepping stone for success?
Um, I don't think you should be bounded by that, but that is what the society will look at you. If you really want a job in high tech companies, they will look at your degree. You don't have a PhD, then they will not look at your resume or give you an interview at the first place. So that's how the reality is. But you certainly, if you don't really, your research doesn't really depend on big resource provided by the big company, then you don't have to do a PhD. I mean, for me, PhD is more about the process, and then to train yourself to be able to become an independent researcher and to handle all the stress that comes with the PhD and graduate study. A lot of things is about handling risk and then uncertainty that come with the research, because you might invest like 1 year of your time working on some idea that didn't work out in the end.
So, following along those lines, what would you advise a person who wants to pursue a PhD? Supposed pitfalls, ways of success, um, basically everything that he or she, or whatever their pronoun is, they are concerned about uh, research, like their concerns about a PhD, and what they should be looking forward to in a PhD in general.
So before you do PhD, you should really understand what kind of the life you want to live after. So maybe give you my view on the on what kind of job that you will get at the PhD, and different job require different research skill. So I would say if you want to be super successful, then like the head of certain research team in big companies, then you have all the resource to do the research. Like if you say that I want to just create a super big language vision model, then you can direct that. And for that, you need to be super talented. And then normal PhD people, student who graduate from PhD may not get that chance. So, and then oftentimes when you graduate from PhD and then you look for an industry job, you are more like the director gave you a much bigger direction. Like let's build this language model, large language model, and then you to think about applying what method to use, right? And then you come up with an algorithm to solve the problem that your director gave you, and then you handle that to a master engineer with master degree, and then they will implement the Python the idea, or they will convert it into certain languages for deployment. And then after that, then then there's certain UI that will be built by undergrads. So that's what I view as how different level of research skill people will work in the industry. Yeah,
So,
and then really understand what where you want to work in that kind of the chain on the research development.
so you did your PhD at Purdue. Why not U Waterloo?
Well, I came to US and then I start doing things. I applied to university in US at the first place. I didn't consider Canada.
Okay, so let's rephrase the question. Why U Waterloo now?
Well, because family issues that I have to find a job that is near
Oh, near
here.
Canada.
And as a follow-up, what do you like about the University of Waterloo and the WIP lab specifically? What do you think you like about this?
So it's also about diversity that the VIP lab offer. Maybe let's talk about the University of Waterloo first. What I like is that it's a very industrial focused university that offers a lot of collaborations and co-op experience with the industry. I think that is very important when we work on researches that eventually we want the research go into products that benefits the society. I think that part is very unique in University of Waterloo for the co-op program. So the students are all trained with very good industrial mentality, and then for our lab, every term we hire co-op, almost every term I think, yeah. And then for what's good about VIP lab is also the diversity of research and people. We have around 70 students plus faculties, I think, And then plus undergrad, we might hit 100.
Wow.
I know I have like 20. So, and then with that amount of diverse research and environment, very open environment, you can talk to anyone in the lab and then work on a completely different project than your assigned project by your supervisor. And then you have the freedom to do any research you want in WIP lab. I think that's the biggest advantage of working in WIP lab.
I think what might also help is the fact that our lab is very much an open floor lab. We have cubicles where we sort of can very easily access other colleagues and exchange ideas. Do you think for research purposes this is actually better than those closed?
Yeah, this is for sure, because as I said, good research you have to be able to explain to people who's 5 years old, but not exactly 5 years old, but you have to be able to explain to people with different skill levels. So with this open discussion environment, that you can just walk up to some other student and then talk about your work, and then it will definitely help you to refine your idea better, refine your method better, and then turn it into a great research.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's sort of along the lines of Richard Feynman's method of basically teach something first, and then you're going to really understand it. So yeah, we're almost out of time. So perhaps one last heavy question. What do you think life means to you? What is the meaning of life for you personally?
Interesting. So during my high school, I read a book by it was The Bondage of Life by some author, and then it was a super long book, and then in the end it says life has no meaning, just enjoy it.
That's very relatable to what I've read recently, and
yeah, I think that's exactly what
philosophy.
I feel about life. Enjoy your current moment. Don't worry about too much about your future and your past. Just enjoy the current.
Yes, that's a powerful one, and I think on that note we can also wish our viewers to enjoy
this podcast. Yeah, definitely. We hope that we presented some content, and in the future, we will present some content that is enjoyable by our viewers, especially researchers in academia.
Yep.
Perfect.
It was a great pleasure to talk to you, Yuhao.
Great. Those are fantastic questions. Thank you for having me.
I hope we're going to have another session if this podcast survives. But
let's be hopeful. It will.
Yeah. Let's be hopeful.
And so we're really happy to have you here, to have had you here, and then we are positive that we'll have you here again sometime in the future.
For sure. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Bye-bye.